Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. This is a very special episode for me, a long time coming, as I had a wonderful opportunity to chat with someone who it's a great privilege to call a dear friend, but who is in all earnestness a lifelong hero of mine, Peter McConnell, originally of LucasArts fame, where he worked on the Monkey Island games and, of course, later culminating in a score like Grim Fandango. He went freelance and became the musical right hand of the great Tim Schafer, working on Psychonauts and, of course, many other titles leading up to the most recent Psychonauts 2. We talked for a solid hour, and it could easily have been 3 times that, given the amount of things that I wanted to ask him about, but we did manage to touch on all of those and just his general background and upbringing and how he got into music and the way in which being a scientist fed his early days in the world of game audio and game music. It's a wonderful chat with a truly remarkable and interesting figure, the likes of which there really is no other in video game music, both for his perspective, his body of work, and the longevity of his career, which certainly shows no sign of stopping. So I hope you enjoy this at least a fraction as much as I did, because it was a genuine honor to speak with him. And here it comes.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
All right. Well, needless to say, I have been looking forward to this for literal years. I can't remember what year it was that I was asked by our gracious hosts here at DICE to take part in this, but the idea of being able to sit down with you and just basically prompt you for war stories has been my, underlying motivation, I think, either overtly or subtextually, because I, you know what I think about you and what I think about your work. But that's just my way of saying it is a real pleasure to be finally doing this.
Well, you're very kind, and it is a real pleasure for me as well. Nice to see you, Austin.
Yeah, likewise. I remember the very first time we met. I was very excited because we were doing the kind of, can't remember what it was called, but Double Fine's podcast that was kind of a recurring thing that they were doing. I assume that probably is not still going at the time, but I honestly don't remember. Chris Remo, I think, was kind of in charge of it. This was before he left, and Brian Min was there, and because Tim had reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to come do a kind of geeky music conversation with Brian and Peter and Chris for our podcast?" Right. And it felt like, this hand had reached from the clouds and said, "Come, please sit on Mount Olympus." I hopefully played it cool that day, totally. But I have been such a lifelong admirer of your work that to be able to sit in something even remotely resembling a colleague peer type configuration was its own sort of benchmark that felt more significant to me than just about anything. I promise I'm not going to do this the entire time, but I want whoever listens to this later to realize the extent to which your work has had an impact on me, and really, I would honestly say, has shaped what I would regard as the potential of this art form. You really did kind of. It's like you set me straight at an early age when I was really passionate about games and really fascinated by games and game music, but I was also really passionate about Jerry Goldsmith and right. Bela Bartok and these composers, and there was always a little bit of a disconnect, and I didn't know anything about the technological limitations. I didn't know anything about kind of why game music sounded so different and was so overwhelmingly electronic, and up through the mid 90s. I wasn't aware what the underlying reasons were. I just knew that I was pound for pound more moved, and there were exceptions. I was into the Zeldas and the Marios, but there were always exceptions. There were very few exceptions that could hold their own. And then when your work really came onto my radar and I realized, okay, wait a minute, this art form, there's nothing inherently broken about the art form at all. I just hadn't had the right spark yet. And so I really do think a lot of the whole reason why I'm even here doing this and in a position to even be talking to you today is because those works, and obviously my feelings about Grim Fandango, really did seem like they set the bar in a place that said this is an art form that can go toe-to-toe with any other art form that's come before. So with that, I say thanks for coming on the Game Maker Notebook, Peter McConnell.
Well, with that, I say, oh shucks. If there's any football I threw out on the field, you've certainly run a long way with it. So that's coming from you, that's a huge compliment. And in the early days, it wasn't completely obvious that you could maybe do something really musical with the limited resources that we had, but those we really tried to at LucasArts, and it helped to have sort of grandiose delusions at the time.
I mean, I want to get into that, but just for to kind of approach this with somewhat of a clean slate for those that I can't fathom that there would be anybody that's not familiar with at least some of your work, if not lots of it. But pre-games, I would love to just get a sense of, how you found your way to music in general and sort of audio and all of that before making your way into LucasArts and kind of
wow,
setting that, set the stage for us, I guess. Because there's things I'm so curious about. We've talked about them here and there over the years, but I want to get them on the record about the time at LucasArts and all that. But prior to that, what was your life like? What path did you think you were on?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I've always loved music, and some of my earliest memories are musical, and I was actually it's ridiculous to go back to your infancy, but I'm going to.
That's what I'm asking for.
When I was about 6 months old, we moved from the States to Switzerland, and I had a medical condition that it was life-threatening, and ended up having to have a tracheotomy. And
wow.
Right at about I guess maybe 8 months, and
is that completely unrelated to leaving the U.S., or was that
no?
Like medical treatment?
And that's what it was a divine intervention in some sense, because my father was studying theology in Basel, which is a beautiful town in Switzerland, and that had just been his goal. And when we moved, it wasn't clear how serious my condition was until we arrived. And lo and behold, his little graduate student apartment was walking distance from about the best ear, nose, and throat clinic in the world.
Wow.
So it was related in the sense that I was real lucky to be there. And so we... I had this tracheotomy, and I don't know if you know much about those, but you can't say much after you've had one. I had a cannula, a little tube in my throat, and so I couldn't talk, but I could listen. And as soon as that thing came out, literally the first thing I did was sing. That's what I'm told, anyway. I have pretty early memories of those years, but probably not not the earliest one. But anyway,
how long? I mean, how long? I certainly don't mean to pry or anything, but
yeah,
so feel free to deflect me away if I get too curious. But I always understood tracheotomies to be a very short-term stopgap measure where you're like, if there's a breathing obstruction or if there's some kind of other, some other kind of medical situation. But it sounds like you're saying that thing was in there for quite some time.
Yeah, it was because I had hemangiomas growing in my throat to get real medical about it, and they were blocking things off and had to be treated.
Is that like I'm not familiar. Is that all akin to like a cyst or something?
It's sort of a tumorous blood vessel.
Oh, wow.
So they had to be treated with X-rays. So yeah, I mean, kind of hairy stuff. But the thing is that what I really, really clearly remember is just loving Mozart. My dad had a old Sony reel-to-reel tape player, and there were two tapes that I would ask him to play over and over again. One was Mozart, and Mozart's Piano Sonata in A major, and the other was which has the Rondo alla Turca at the end, and the Sons of the Pioneers, which is for those of you who don't know do you know who the Sons of the Pioneers were by any chance?
I'm convinced that I don't, but
they're not big now. They were the premier cowboy band from the 30s through the early 60s. And they had a lot.
I'm checking. It's one of those that sometimes my things will get kind of filed in the wrong drawer in my brain, and I'll think, yeah, and then I'll look or I'll hear and I'll go, wait a minute, actually, no, not at all. And as I look at photos, I'm pretty sure that you're breaking new ground with me here.
Well, they had, I think Gene Autry might have sang, and they were really, songs like Streets of Laredo and
Roy Rogers.
Roy Rogers was one of this. That's who I'm thinking of. And apparently, I think Festus from Gunsmoke, if you want to go back to old TV shows, I think he might have been a one-time singer. But anyway, it very much point is Americana. So there I was in Switzerland, and I had these two influences. One was Mozart, and the other was American folk music. And I had this very strong sense of being an American, even though I was living in Europe. And at the time, actually, Swiss German was my first language as a little guy. But so I've always
I never knew that.
I've always carried with me these kind of two sides, which are, you might say, the classical side and the rock and roll side, or the folk side and the academic side. But in any case, it's that's all. Those two things have always influenced me. And when we moved from Switzerland to the States when I was 4.5, or maybe about 4.5, it's right when the Beatles came came here. Dating myself, huh? And hey,
that's all right.
So there was that going on, which was totally amazing. But where we moved to from Switzerland was Eastern Kentucky, Appalachia, where my dad taught at a little college there, and so it was some pretty serious culture shock. Apparently, my mom told me that I picked up the local accent really quickly, but kept the German sentence structure. So I was like, after you have the lights out turned, that's not a very good. That's not a very good Kentucky accent. That's a hard one to really do correctly.
Yeah, you were a little south of there, I suspect.
But it's in any case, really hardcore was exposed to sort of Americana. Flatt and Scruggs had a TV show, local TV show, not syndicated, that was broadcast from West Virginia that you could tune into if you could get the TV to get the right reception. And I
Huh.
remember watching that a few times, and just
So
being
that's
amazed by that sort of thing. Yeah.
it's funny somehow. The kind of amalgam of those influences, and particularly the Americana, it doesn't really surprise me learning that, just simply because the thing that music really uh, holds on to so purely is because it's just so utterly unpretentious, and
Yep.
there's no kind of fussiness to it. It is there to communicate something in a very direct way, and it only works to the extent that you just feel it and you get it. That's the thing that makes folk music what it is. I think the melody as the kind of torchbearer of that, in particular, with that kind of music, it would
Yeah,
seem that's a stamp in your. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, and it also has it's well, it is simple and direct, and without artifice, but it's also very deep because it comes from traditions in the British Isles and also from Africa. You have the African rhythms that come through the banjo music, and the blues influence. So that if you hear songs sung in Appalachia, uh, an Appalachian version of Barbary Ellen is not going to be the same as a British Isles version. So it's a from up from the earth kind of a music that people have been handing down, um, for so long, and so that kind of depth is, that's something that always appealed to me. And I just liked the melodies and the rhythms. I was always a big hee haw fan, for example.
But it's and I feel like I can really feel that in your writing, because you're capable of really sophisticated handling of the orchestra, but I've never heard anything of yours that I thought even bordered on what you could call pretentious. It never felt like you were sort of trying to, I could never imagine you sitting there working on it thinking, ooh, this little inversion of the melody is going to really impress them. Like, some composers, whether it's true or not, sometimes I'll get that intuitive sense that somebody is trying to flex in some sense or
Hmm.
another through their writing.
Yeah.
And the best composers are just a conduit for whatever their sort of inner voice is saying. And you seem to, I wouldn't have ever known to attribute that to this kind of Americana folk fixation that you had early on, but that I could venture that may be part of why your music has that quality.
I think maybe that's got something to do with it. I mean, I lived a lot of places. My dad moved around a lot, so we lived in Kentucky and Kansas and New Jersey before I went to school. Uh, and then in college, at Harvard, okay, well, what was I doing at the time? I actually thought I was going to be a physicist.
I
Um,
remember you saying that to me once, and that blew my
and
mind.
and I had worked really hard in high school in New Jersey to I mean, I took like college courses and stuff in high school, and really wanted to um, be a big time scientist, and so that when I went to college, and uh, I just the thing was, there's a difference between liking something and doing it all the time.
I mean, yeah,
and
that's the kind of the tragic story with a lot of artists.
so what I found was, well, a number of things sort of came together. I wasn't really paying attention to the fact that in high school I'd spent an awful lot of time doing music, like a lot, and had taught myself to play, getting back to the folk thing, 5-string banjo uh, and guitar, and I had taken classical violin lessons. And I mean, I really loved music, but I just sort of, I think in some sense, thought I should be a scientist. I don't know. And
Huh.
so, but when you start to really get into it and you have to study and pull an all-nighter every week, uh, and your guitar's just sitting there, and one of the, I didn't really realize this at the time, but sophomore year, uh, I had this experience where Yo-Yo Ma was our house tutor.
What?
And this was, and yeah, he was our music tutor, and in the house, and or he was an artist in residence. I'm sorry, there was a different music tutor. He was the artist in residence, and this was before Yo-Yo Ma was famous, right? But everybody was saying, you got to hear this guy play. He's amazing. He's going to be the best cellist in the world, right?
How old would he have been at the time?
Probably in his 20s or something. I don't know.
Wow.
He was young, and anyway, so my room, my dorm room, was a flight of stairs up from the was called in that dorm the senior common room, which you go through a big pair of oak doors, and there's a little sort of kind of listening, like a amphitheater, not really amphitheater, smaller than that, a salon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had this experience where Friday night, no, it must have been Thursday night. Why the heck was he playing on Thursday night? Jeez, he should have played on.
Let's get him on the phone and get the answer.
Well, anyway, I know that he was giving a free concert, and I could have walked down those stairs and sat and listened to the greatest cellist in the world, as far away from him as it looks like I am from you now.
Yeah.
And, but instead I finished that dang problem set.
And was that the moment that, in the moment, was there any awareness of
in the moment,
that moment?
Those times in your life when you have a little voice that you're not really paying attention to, but you can kind of hear it going, this isn't a very good idea, or yeah. You'll be sorry. I think there was a little bit of that. I really, it took me a while. There were a bunch of experiences I had where I realized, not only do I just not like getting up for 8:30 classes, I'm just not really a scientist. But I really love music. So I took a couple years off and played music in the subways. I was a busker for a while and a security guard and all kinds of different things, and came back and majored in music. And that was a big change. And then when I graduated, how do you find a job? So I got a job with my by virtue of having had some math background, programming at Lexicon. Lexicon, they make that.
Oh yeah, of course.
So they make really great.
Still basically units, the best, right? Reverb. Yep.
Yes, it is. And in my unbiased opinion,
is this where you're going to tell me that you essentially built that? Is that your baby? Is there some iteration?
I was not. I worked on some units that you might know, and I did a small amount of DSP programming, a lot of user interface program. Essentially, I was a sort of an audio engineer, and also worked there with Michael Land, who had been a friend of mine in the music department. And we'd worked on my senior honors thesis together, and we kind of hatched an idea to leave the Boston area and do something more musical. And we were going to come out here and start a jam band with Clint Pachakian.
Yeah. Okay. So he was going to be the next question: is where did you guys first connect with him?
Well, Michael and Clint went to prep school together.
I never knew that.
And Michael was older, and then and Clint ended up going to New England Conservatory, which is of course right in the area, and so he's really the most schooled musician of all of us because he's got a master's from Chicago, University of Chicago, I think it is. Anyway, so we were hanging out, playing in bands together, and meanwhile, there was computers were going through this huge, massive transformation, and a computer game, as it were, when I was still like in an undergraduate and then a teaching assistant in an electronic music lab. Well, right when just for perspective, the year I graduated on the 6-year plan was the year that the Mac came out.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one in the electronic music studio, and just everything was changing so fast. And at that point, computer games had been something that you would play on, like, for example, when I was working at Lexicon, there was something called a VAX, Unix VAX, PDP. Digital Equipment Corporation. That's who made those things. It was a small mainframe, and it came equipped, because it was all programmed by nerds from MIT. Came equipped with something called Rogue, and there was another which you could play, which was basically the first shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that you did with a little asterisk to chase a little asterisk around on the screen. And then there was another game called Zork, which is much more familiar to people, and that was originally written on a Unix VAX, and then Infocom was just happening, and they were just forming and taking Zork out into the world at that time. So that's what computer games were for me in say 1984 or something like that, 86.
And did the potential jump out because some people, they didn't look at it and go, this is the next art form.
No, it was totally something for geeks. It was like there was a badge of honor to get every single point in Zork. The last one, you actually had to send in a letter, a stamped envelope to Infocom to get the final point. And I had a buddy who was a fellow physics dude who got the final point. It's like it's one of those things that
like some people become Eagle Scouts and other people get that final Zork point.
It was a rare, and totally a niche world, right? Just basically us geeks were doing it, and the idea that a computer game would be something like popular entertainment was just kind of ludicrous at that time. But by 1990, which is when I finally made it out to California, and Michael had just come out the year before, the band thing kind of fell through. But Michael was like, you got to come and see what I'm doing here at LucasArts, because I'm working on this music system, and he showed me Monkey Island 1. And that was a moment, because what I was
hard
seeing
to imagine otherwise
was actual like visual entertainment, and with dialogue and drama, and it really needed music, and hey, the MT32 sounded pretty good. So that's when I really became involved and got deeply into and of course, in the larger culture, games were still a niche thing,
niche. Absolutely.
And the Lucas, it was called Lucasfilm Games. We were called the Games Division in those days. Mm-hmm. We were kind of the weird little stepchild. Is like, oh, you had ILM, and oh, you had Lucasfilm, and the Skywalker Sound, and then over here you got a bunch of guys wearing fezzes. They had the little fezzes. Tim Schafer will remember the little red fezzes, I'm sure. And there are these weird guys working on these games, right? And so it was very new, and definitely. And if you told someone you you write music for games, they would say, "Oh, you mean bloops and bleeps?" I mean, literally those words. Oh, comma, you mean bloops and bleeps? Unquote. Right. That
is the like cliche that will not die. The number of times that I've done like concerts, for example, where it's not the, big city hubs of like New York or London or LA or something, but you do a hub. Like I did a concert earlier this year. My first kind of step out of the pandemic was a show with a small orchestra in Evansville, Indiana. And I don't think they said this precisely, but like the local paper advertising the show that the orchestra is going to be doing, they'll say, and we'll also feature, the no longer beeps and bloops of video game music.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, it's still hanging on as this idea. It hasn't been that way for decades.
Honestly, those bloops and bleeps were charming. I mean, when I was working in the electronic music studio in college, I'd get hungry and I'd go down to Three Aces over by the law school, which was the sub shop, and you could sit down and play Centipede. And and those sounds that are forever emblazoned in my ears. Really, just from walking in and having the sub, if nothing else. But so it was. Games were a huge part of the culture in a way that, like Pac-Man, or they were a huge part of the culture, but a huge and decidedly unserious part. It was for kids.
I mean, it seems like for the longest time, it was relegated to the same level of attention or seriousness paid as, comics or really, you could argue all animation for the longest time. It was not considered a path to anything serious or artful or deep or at best it was for kids. And at worst it was a vice for kids, like drugs, like with Nancy Reagan waving her finger at you, like you really shouldn't be playing these things. And that I think there's still a contingent of that. Sure. But it's, to me, that idea that, cause I was a kid in the days that you're describing, and for me, I was so fixated immediately, whether it was beeps and bloops or, the graduation to 8 and 16-bit capabilities. And then before you know it, I'm listening to playback of audio. That whole time, it seemed like this escape into a world. And it was always strange to me that people would look at it and go, really? So I love hearing these stories about looking at, especially Monkey Island, which was such a big one for me. That game, that whole franchise, the lineage of the LucasArts adventure games. I was big into the Sierra titles, and I was big into LucasArts, but LucasArts was really where my heart was. I was also a big Star Wars nerd, so I was already all in on LucasArts anyway.
Right.
But then between, Loom and Maniac Mansion and the Monkey Island series, and then Full Throttle, subsequently, the Dig. It just was like the idea of looking at the titles that were starting to emerge in the early 90s and just persistently hanging on to that idea that it is some kind of fluff, at best diversionary kind of superficial entertainment and has no real merit, is obviously it struck me as ludicrous even as a kid. But I just love hearing these stories of seeing there being on the ground floor of that and seeing it for what it was. And it wasn't just a gig, but you thought, holy crap, this has potential.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, initially I was there to both work on the technology and the music. But really for me, it was always about, the music. It's, in those days, you just kind of were, you're also you not only were you your own driver, you were your own mechanic, so.
I want to get into that. I before we do, I have a slightly lateral question though, which is something that you haven't touched on at all yet. That has been a major component of your music for as long as I've known it, is jazz. Mm-hmm. And where did jazz enter? Because you can tell the difference between someone who really gets jazz and somebody who kind of can temporarily put on that hat. And I feel like I'm probably almost certainly in the latter category. I love jazz, but real proper jazz musicians it's in their blood in a way that I don't want to pretend that it is in mine. And when I hear it is in your writing, it just seems like at somewhere in those early days it had to have figured in, but you haven't mentioned it. So I wanted to ask, because I actually have never asked you this as far as I remember.
I did skip that. And that was a huge moment for me. Well, but it's not going to sound, very visceral, but, I'm
prepared to be underwhelmed.
I fell in love with jazz from taking Afro-American Studies 133. Introduction to jazz.
Straight to the heart. Yes, to the root. Yeah.
So I'd love to say that I used to sneak away to jazz clubs or something like that, but in fact, it was pretty much the most elite presentation of this music that you could imagine. But the thing
There's a
about
charm to that, though.
although but actually now the course was cool because it was led by this it was led by the band conductor of the Harvard Jazz Band and also the marching band, and it was the simplest format you could imagine. He would give lectures, but pretty much it's almost once a week or once every other week or something. He would just bring some cool player in to talk. And that was the thing that, so I heard right up, I heard right up close people like John Schofield, Illinois Jacquette, Al Hurt, Milt Hinton, amazing bassist from who played with absolutely everybody from I want to say he played with Benny Goodman. He played in the years of the Cotton Club, stuff like that. And it was hearing the actual musicians talk about their experience playing and just creating that was so incredibly inspiring. And it was just from listening. The thing that drew me to it was the rhythm. And it was, not something, and I had a taste of it from my interest in folk music and bluegrass, like when I was younger, bluegrass in particular, because there's a rhythmic complexity to it, to well-played bluegrass. That it's very American, and jazz is very American, and it comes in that, and so just the whole why rhythm was so important. Why? Because when you study classical music, rhythm is just it's a parameter, but when you study jazz, if you really listen to it, rhythm is the heart of it. It's just not to knock classical music. It's just that the roots of classical music are Gregorian chant, essentially, are sung rhythmless.
I was going to say, vocal. Exactly. A vocal, an inherently melodic art form that's built around the voice that, all the symphonies and operas and all that trace back to that sort of liturgical origin that jazz has basically none of that in its origins.
No, jazz is the closest thing jazz has to that is the field holler. Really, it comes from it, but it's a way of taking marching band music and, well, I don't want to get in. I don't want to be an amateur musicologist here, but point is that it really is a different approach, and it was and it really was satisfying. And I'm not really, I'm not a great player. I think I've done so much jazz composition actually because I'm not that great I want to realize that sound by finding other players who can really do it. And,
well, that's the story of our life in general as composers.
And and I find that, so it sort of gets back to that two halves thing that I was mentioning earlier, where it's like, half of me is just really loves melody and harmony and that kind of complexity, and another half of me is more connected to the roots in the ground or something.
I totally get it. So then the question is, how, because those early days, like you said, you were the driver and the mechanic, and that's the classic story you always hear about. This is part of the reason why I initially didn't see a path for myself in video game music as a kid. When I started looking, okay, where do I want to go to college and whatnot? It was, if I want to write music and go be like my heroes, that trio at LucasArts or people like that, I basically would have to get a staff job, and I would probably have to be a pretty well-versed programmer. And I, as I looked around, I felt like not really interested in that. I studied programming in high school, thinking maybe I was also tempted to just go be a game designer and music always be on the side before abandoning that plan, fortunately. But that idea that you have to be the all-in-one, I always visualized it as the group gathering together and some, project director type saying, "Does anybody here know any music?" And some random person in the group would raise their hands. "Okay, great, you're the composer." And it's kind of like just anybody who knows how two notes go together on a keyboard is sufficient, because you're all here basically as programmers first, or engineers in some capacity.
That's that, and that's why I ended it. I was doing some voice acting in the early years. I mean, we did have to do everything, and that was, I mean, it was all by necessity. It was like for me, I really wanted to do the music, but here was this wonderful job where I could actually do music and also do a little bit of the technical stuff that makes the music happen. So kind of satisfying a little bit of that old scientist in me a little bit.
Beyond your many great scores then and now, one of your real seminal contributions to this art form was on the technological front. What began at LucasArts in those days, and I don't actually know kind of who did what or anything, but the interactive music system that is sort of synonymous with that era of the LucasArts games and scores. Where did this project begin, and how, obviously if you didn't have that science background and know-how, I can't imagine it would have been possible to undertake something as sort of forward-thinking and sophisticated as the SCUM system. Where, and forgive me if I'm overstating your contribution to, I can't remember if that was your child or you were part of the team, or
it was really Michael's brainchild, but I was a pretty significant design contributor. And I kind of brought my experience. We both worked for Lexicon, but I had a particular experience with working with sort of host and DSP processor interactions that turned out to be a nice metaphor for what we were doing with that.
Just for the sake of a listener, in particular the youngins who may not be familiar with that, what is your kind of high-level summary of what it was and how it worked?
Well, IMUSE is basically it was the precursor to things like Fmod and WWise. It was a system that allowed you to navigate through specially treated music so that the musical transitions that you make from one section of music to another, or what instruments are playing in a particular time, that those transitions were coordinated with what's happening in the game. So the term used these days is adaptive music. The music adapts to what's going on. We used to call it interactive music because I always felt like the game player was part of the loop and responding to the music as well. So you're responding to the music, you do something in the game causes the music to do something. And it's this really interesting
circular relationship.
Yeah.
I realized I said SCUM, that's the game engine.
SCUM was the game engine. Yeah.
IMUSE,
scripting language. IMUSE was the actual name of the system.
Yeah. I retract labeling it SCUM. The IMUSE. Yeah. Well, so what would you say fundamentally separates it from the way WISE or Fmod work today? Because it obviously it was, chasing the same exact goal, but it's very novel at the time.
No, it was the precursor. I mean, not really much separates it. I'd say Fmod and WISE both, kind of have adopted a lot of the things that we did, and plus some others.
They always, with necessity often being the mother of invention. what prompted the development of this? Obviously, I assume there was some kind of dissatisfaction with what you were able to do. So,
well, this is one of those things of this is one of the benefits of working at a time when things are kind of young and chaotic, right? No, we were simply given the task of writing the new sound drivers.
So you way overshot the mark.
And Michael was like, we could do something way more cool than just a sound driver. And that's really what that was. It was simply the musicians wanted to have fun, and it was actually a bit of a controversy, because when the system and the music took more than one floppy disk out of the 5 that shipped. This was a really bad, a big no-no, and so there was much back and forth about how to handle the. You
were overstating your boundaries, I guess.
What do you mean your drivers take more than a floppy disk?
That's so funny.
And who would have guessed then that? Well, we had some idea, to be honest with you, but who would have guessed then that years later I'd be doing 3-hour scores for Psychonauts with Psychonauts 2 with orchestra and rhythm section in Nashville.
I mean, even just a few years later with Grim Fandango, I remember buying that and it came on 4 CDs.
Right.
And the scope felt just epically massive, and that was loaded with live recordings
you had to change CDs when you went to a new world. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And jamming the music into those CDs for Grim was a real challenge. We had to compress it a little bit. I mean, there was it's a huge amount of voiceover in that game too. So it must have had a tremendous amount of competition from the other realms of the audio department. Not to mention all those pesky visuals. Yes.
Yes. So just because I am such a fanatic for Grimm, one of the things that we've talked about, and I've certainly heard you talk about in other interviews and things like that, is obviously leaping into this realm of leaping out of the realm of kind of hardware-based music for games into a time, the CD-ROM and such, where you can actually play back audio, something new, and the fact that I played a lot of games in that time that would have voiceover, but it was still all whatever the kind of current generation of either synths or what now we would call VSTs, but basically the earliest precursors to MIDI sounds.
Right.
And you totally sidestepped that. And I know that the initial, of course, release, the orchestral parts were not live,
right? But
it was loaded with it featured these performers, these incredible musicians. And I'm just, something. First off, I just would love to hear, if that required any convincing of the folks at LucasArts, or if that was kind of a no-brainer. And then also, I love your stories. And I just, forgive me for prompting you to tell a story I already know, but just how you found these players.
Well, so yeah. I mean, what prompted the decision not to to do as much live music as possible. Well, I think before there was a title that we did before Grim that had a lot of live players, and I feel like it was either. Because one of the Monkey 3, we'd done Full Throttle, and that was kind of dipping our toes in with, but that was mostly the live stuff. There was from the band.
Yeah, right.
And
the Gone Jackals.
Yes, and fabulous band. But with Grim, we had done. There was one other title that we had done with a little bit of live that was really well received.
There was on the Dig. I remember there was also that sampling of Wagner.
That's another one. That's another one that happened around then. And so it was kind of in the air. But but regarding the jazz, it was just for me. Again, it kind of gets back to why do I love jazz? Because it's about the human feel. So it wasn't wasn't even for a second going to be a question. I mean, when Tim sort of came to me with the with the art and the story, and it's just like, well, okay, well, we're gonna have jazz music here. Let's have some players, and yeah, we did have to. There was no way that we could have made the argument in those days at that time that a live orchestra should be hired.
But you very smartly used so little as a result. Like it's not, the orchestra plays a very small part of the overall impression. So you don't really walk away with, it was, would have been nice if it was live. You barely remember the orchestra because it lives along the edges.
Yeah. And it's not part of the orchestra is not part of the work. It's more in the cutscenes. It's not part of the world you're really interacting with so much.
Right.
And that was also kind of deliberate, I think, deliberate in hindsight.
Yeah, I really only ever remember, there was just that one, up on the ledge. That is burned into my brain as one of the actual orchestral cues. But the rest is overwhelmingly these guitarists and these, mariachi trumpet and this, your bass clarinet. My God, what a feature that is as well.
Yeah, that was a fellow named Ralph Carney, who's no longer with us. He's an amazing player, and he used to play with. He was a fixture in the Bay Area scene. He used to play with Tom Waits.
What a sound!
Yeah, and not just the bass clarinet, but the contrabass clarinet, which is just a crazy. And another instrument of his own invention called the slide clarinet. Ralph was a one of a kind, and that was a thing where I learned a lot about working with different musicians because I had this solo all scored out for him to play, and it's not like Ralph couldn't read; it's really that he didn't want to.
Right.
So he would kind of dutifully play this, okay, kind of. And I started to feel like, oh boy, this session's not, and I had not done a lot of recording at the time. So I was kind of slow on the uptake, but I started to realize, Ralph is just not, this is not his cup of tea. And he's this great player. And so I just, okay, well, take 5, let's just do what you would do. Just do what you do on this. And then that was a freeing moment. And it caught, the whole session opened up, and we got all these great solos as a result.
And you did all of that score, if I recall, one by one by one. Every musician, there were no group sessions, right?
We were able to do bass and drums together. That was pretty much it. Yeah, it was the studio at LucasArts in the 90s was very small, and we had actually done a lot of convincing to get it to be built. Yeah.
It's unreal because it really doesn't, jazz is such a conversational, and you pulled a hat trick on that when you told me that, I think it was at that day when I came up to Double Fine for that podcast, and I started asking you all these Grim Fandango questions like a shameless fanboy. You mentioned that it was all just person by person by person, and that seemed impossible because it is just anathema to that genre of music, and somehow between how you put it together and the way you communicated to the players and just their own really superhuman intuition about how to play it, it does not read like that.
That last one was the key because part of it also was the sparse orchestration, because actually I was kind of inexperienced, so I kept it spare. But at the end of the day, these players were awesome. I actually tried to use as many of them as I could on Psychonauts too, with especially Paul Hansen, the bassoonist, who's just a phenomenal player. But people so Paul played a bunch in Grim. He played a bunch of different winds besides the bassoon. He played some tenor sax and maybe some alto. Now I can't remember.
The tenor stuff in all the tenor parts in particular on that score are so like raunchy
Yep.
and oily, you know, and just the
Yeah.
best in the best
Well,
way.
you should hear what he does with an electric bassoon. It's pretty phenomenal. It's just amazing. And he also played the clarinet, the um, bum 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 bum. He played that was Paul playing
Oh,
that
no
clarinet
kidding.
line. But yeah, so it just, you know, and then you had you know, Bill Ortiz, who I believe he still plays with Santana, and just a fantastic trumpet player. And yeah, it really was about the players in terms of getting that to be convincing. And they were all just, you know, real veterans who knew how to, you walk into a studio and make it sound like everybody's in the same room together.
Well, and it's you playing the violin. Certainly, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well,
And
a couple places, yeah.
yeah, well, come on, it's the big romantic tango, and
Yeah. It's yeah. I still play violin sometimes on some of
I
my
just
dudes.
Facebook was reminding me just the other day of our experience together on stage at Red Rocks, where you were sporting the
Oh,
violin.
that was super fun. Yeah.
Definitely didn't seem like a hobbyist that day. It seemed, you know, part of deep in the fingers.
Well, you know, that was my first instrument.
So I could endlessly go on and on about Grimm, but what I love is that there are very few people in this business that can talk about getting in the late 80s, early 90s that are still at the absolute top of the business. And one of the biggest releases of the year is Psychonauts 2. And I to me, it just brings me no shortage of joy that you continue to work at this level and to write these scores. Never mind Hearthstone and all the other things that, you know, lay claim to massive place in the business. But I'm only about halfway through the game, so I've only heard you know, what would get me through to that point. But goddamn, is it just as vibrant and you know, vivacious? I don't know that I have sufficient vocabulary, but there's just something about the energy of what you do, that everything you're saying about rhythm and melody. It doesn't sound like somebody that's grown weary of this gig. How about that?
That's well, thanks. And I mean, you know, Psychonauts 2 was such a wonderful project to work on because it was because Psychonauts 1 was really my first gig as an independent
I
composer.
I didn't think of that connection. Right.
And we were all, you know, in much humbler circumstances then. I mean, Double Fine was literally working out of a garage, so I was able to use some of the same players as worked on Grimm, but not very many players on Psychonauts 1. I really had to do a lot of improvising, which is always good. But at the same time, it leaves you going, man, you know, if only we'd been able to do such and such, and so to return to those themes and have the resources to just actually go where you want to with them, that was such a joy. And you know, being able to do all that recording with Melbourne Symphony, which was super lucky because the second set of recording sessions was during COVID, and I don't think you could record an orchestra pretty much anywhere in the world at that time. We were just so lucky they could get half the orchestra on the stage at a time.
I was going to ask how you did it.
That's how we did it. We followed all the social distancing rules by splitting things, and we thought we were actually going to have to split it into three initially. We had the original plan for the recordings was they'd be three groups of 20 or something. It was ridiculous. And
how much did you end up recording with them? Because it seems like the orchestra is pretty omnipresent in the score.
It's like a couple hours. I actually don't have, I have those numbers on my big spreadsheet. I just don't have a good memory. But it was a lot. And also some of that was was then combined with other players like Nashville Rhythm Section and
That was going to be my next question, actually, because there's some real legit kind of quasi big bandy stuff during the whole casino sequence. And I was going to say, is that the Melbourne folks also?
It's kind of half and half. The big number that gets played when you're out on the floor, the sort of that's all Melbourne players. Fantastic drummer, by the way. But yeah, they were a local jazz cats that were part of I think a couple of them might have been symphony players, but it was something that
augmented the group.
Yeah, we augmented the group a little bit, and then for some of the tracks we had bass and drums done in Nashville. So for like the big boss number that you might be thinking of, that's a Nashville rhythm section, and then the orchestral Melbourne players, and then my good friend Andy Burton, who plays for Little Stephen and the Disciples of Soul, playing the Hammond organ in Hoboken. So it was, you had three completely different studios, all recorded remotely.
Yeah. But isn't that amazing, though, about the world we live in now, that you can, with Pro Tools able to just zip around over file transfers, you can do basically anything.
Mighty lucky, I have to say. Mighty lucky that we were able to do that, because, just a few years ago, the technology just wasn't even there. So, I mean, kind of hard to say, kind of hard to talk about how COVID could have been worse, but it would have been worse actually a few years ago. So.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the fact that we live in a time where we can do, I mean, this podcast used to be an exclusively in-person podcast,
right?
And we didn't want to stop the show, so it became, all right, well, what tools can we use to find ways to connect with people online? And the fact that so much music and art was able to get made, COVID would have been worse if all variables had otherwise been equal, but we hadn't been able to make art. I think that you can logically say that would have been a worse COVID. Like,
Yes.
I've been thrilled about it. I know you have to run. I want to be conscious of your time, but it's just such a joy and a privilege to be able to kind of, get these little tastes of the check marks along the way, all that you've seen and managed to be part of and bear witness to in the evolution of this art form. There's so few people that are such active participants in it who have been riding shotgun for so long in the industry. And I say that I hope the reverence of that is clear. And it doesn't read as some kind of weirdly ageist sounding thing. I have such admiration.
Yeah. I get enough of being a boomer from my daughter, so I'm immune to that. I'm just super lucky. I mean, the thing is that we're very privileged to have the work that we have, writing music for a living. It's very hard to stay in business doing it. It's hard work when you do it, but it's also super, super satisfying. And I just feel blessed, really, to have been able to score, work with folks like Tim Schafer and score things that I feel are like a real, and I'm sure you feel the same way, as when you're working on something that's got a real statement to make, a real art, some artistic value, some cultural value. That feels really good to be able to be part of that.
I do feel very, very lucky, but I will say one of the things I feel so lucky about is there's a real keen sense of not being an island. The fact that I get to look to someone like you as both a friend and a colleague, and yet someone who also was part of the inspiration for me to pursue this. And I also have friends and colleagues that were, kind of rode in parallel the whole time. And then there's people who are just starting today who are 10 years or 15 years younger than me, who I look to and I think, damn, that's some great work too. You know,
there's a lot of great work out there for sure.
It's an amazingly lucky thing to feel part of. So
yes,
I want to let you go because I know you got stuff to do. But thank you again so much for doing this. We'll have to do part 2, because there's a whole other subject of that idea of transitioning to the world of freelance that is so worth unpacking. And you have an insight into that that's pretty unique relative to others. So I'll have to track you down and find a way to bring you in for a round 2. But in the meantime, thank you so very much for doing this.
Well, it's my great pleasure, Austin. I really appreciate your having me.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.